That was the night my son stopped seeing me as a mother and started seeing me as an expense. My name is Linda Carpenter, 62 years old. For 25 years, I worked as the chief accountant for a chain of nursing homes in Colorado. Numbers were my comfort. They never lied, never turned their backs. I was known for precision, quiet efficiency, and the kind of discipline that keeps whole institutions afloat. When I decided to retire early, I imagined peace mornings with tea and sunlight, evenings spent helping my son's family, maybe knitting something for my future grandchild, Ryan. My only child had always been my pride. He carried my husband's quiet discipline, or so I thought, and my steady patience, or so I thought. After his father passed a decade ago, it was just the two of us for a long time. When he got married to Melanie, I was genuinely happy. I sold my house in Fort Collins and moved in with them here in Denver. Ryan insisted it was temporary, that I'd save on rent while figuring out my next step. I took him at his word. The house was spacious, 2 stories new. Appliances, a polished marble counter that smelled faintly of lemon cleanser. Melanie liked everything in beige tones, beige rugs, beige walls, beige silence. I tried not to disturb that balance. I watered the plants kept to my small corner room upstairs. That evening, the sky outside glowed soft orange and snow clouds gathered beyond the windows. I came home early, a little nervous, but hopeful. After 25 years of service, the company was merging with a national healthcare firm. I wasn't laid off exactly, just given early retirement options. It sounded gentle enough. I decided to present it to Ryan as a temporary break, thinking we could celebrate this new chapter together. Melanie was setting the table when I entered. The scent of rosemary chicken filled the kitchen. Ryan sat at the head of the table, scrolling on his phone, his brow furrowed. "Hey, Mom," he said, without looking up. "You're home early. I have news," I replied, placing my bag by the chair. "I've been offered an early retirement package. It's not final yet, but I might take it." Ryan's thumb froze on the screen. Slowly, he lifted his eyes toward me, his expression tightening. "Retirement. You mean you're quitting?" I'd say, pausing. I said softly. "The company's merging. Things are uncertain. I thought maybe it's time. I've saved enough to take a short break, stay close to family." There was a pause long enough for the air to grow heavy. The only sound was the clatter of Melanie's silver bangles as she reached for the wine bottle. Ryan exhaled sharply. "Mom, what do you mean, short break? You're 62. You still have years left to work. What about your insurance mortgage? You can't just stop." I smiled faintly, trying to calm him. "I have my pension and some savings. I thought this might be a good chance to focus on things I've missed, maybe gardening again or volunteering." Ryan's jaw tightened. "And where exactly are you planning to live while you're volunteering?" "Here, you know, Melanie and I have plans for this house. It's already tight." Melanie said gently, though her eyes glimmered with amusement, "Don't be so harsh." Then turning to me, she added, "In this economy, people your age don't retire. They fade out." She laughed at her own words. It was a small, polished laugh, perfectly rehearsed. Something in me shifted. I felt the warmth drain from my face. "I'm not asking for money," I said quietly. "I'm simply saying I'll be around more to help. With bills, cooking, whatever you need, I can still contribute." Ryan leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Help, Mom, it's not about that. You can't just assume you'll stay here forever. We're trying to start a family. We need space. And if you're not working, I don't know how you'll manage expenses. You can't expect us to cover everything. I never said I would," I replied. He gave a short, cold laugh. "Come on, Mom, let's be real. You don't have income now, right? So who's going to pay for your share of utilities, groceries, gas?" The words cut through me, not because of the money, but because of the tone, calculating, detached, as if I were another item in his budget. Melanie poured herself wine, her manicured fingers tapping the glass. "Ryan's just being practical," she said. "We're all adjusting. Maybe you could look for part-time bookkeeping work. Keep busy. Stay relevant." Her smile was polite, but her eyes said something else entirely. "Don't stay too long. The air in the room grew colder. The rosemary scent now felt suffocating. I looked at my plate at the thin slice of chicken I could no longer taste. "I see," I murmured. Ryan sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mom, don't take it personally. It's just things are expensive. And honestly, I thought you'd understand that better than anyone. You were an accountant, for God's sake." That was the moment. The exact second something inside me cracked. For 25 years, I had balanced other people's ledgers, fixed their losses, made sure every cent was accounted for. But in that instant, I realized I had failed to balance the most important account of all my own worth in my son's eyes. I forced a small smile, though my throat felt tight. "You're right, Ryan. I do understand numbers. I understand cost." I gathered my plate and walked toward the sink. My hands trembled as I rinsed it, not from anger, but from the weight of recognition. My own son, the boy I once carried through fevers and exams, was now measuring me in dollars and square footage. Behind me, Melanie said lightly, "Don't worry, Linda. Once things settle at work, I'm sure you'll find something. Maybe remote bookkeeping for retirees, or what was it you used to say, every cent counts." Her laughter lingered like perfume-sweet synthetic and impossible to wash off. I dried my hands carefully, aligning the towel edges with the counter as I always did. Small order in a world suddenly disordered. Later that night, when the house fell quiet, I sat by the window in my room. The snow had begun to fall, silent, steady, indifferent. I stared at my reflection in the glass, faint and pale against the dark. That was the night I understood something no spreadsheet had ever taught me. People can audit your worth without ever opening a ledger. I clasped my hands together, fingers stiff from years of calculation and service. They were trembling slightly now, the kind of tremor that comes before a decision. I didn't know it yet, but that dinner was the beginning of my transformation. The last night I would ever measure myself by someone else's balance sheet. Because sometimes when the people you love start treating you like an expense, you learn to become your own investment. And I promised myself quietly that I would never let anyone write me off again. The morning after that dinner, the house felt strangely hollow. Silence settled over every corner like frost on a window. I woke early out of habit. Even with no office to go to, my body still followed the old rhythm, 6:00 a.m., shower, tidy bed, make breakfast. The coffee pot hissed softly on the counter, filling the air with its bitter comfort. For a brief second, I imagined things would return to normal. That last night's conversation had been a bad dream. Then I heard the voice from the hallway. "Linda, my mom's coming by this morning. She'll stay for lunch," Melanie said, standing at the kitchen doorway. Her hair was tied neatly, lips tinted a cold pink. I turned from the stove. "Patricia." "That's nice. It's been a while since I saw her." Melanie smiled faintly. "Yes, she said she wants to talk about some things." The pause between her words told me enough. By 10 o'clock, the snow outside had turned the street into a white river. I wiped the kitchen counter again, more from nerves than necessity. When the doorbell rang, Ryan opened it before I could. Patricia stepped in her boots, spotless despite the weather. She was a woman who never aged, sleek bob haircut, sharp perfume, and a voice that carried authority wherever it landed. "Linda," she said, giving me a look that balanced politeness and pity. "You look tired." "I'm fine, Patricia. Coffee." She shook her head, unbuttoning her coat. "No, thank you. We should talk before lunch." Melanie joined her mother on the couch. Ryan stood behind them, arms folded. I stayed by the kitchen archway, wiping my hands on a towel that didn't need cleaning. Patricia crossed her legs, sighing. "I heard about your situation, Linda. Retirement. That's a big change." "It's temporary," I said calmly. "I'm just figuring things out." She tilted her head. "Of course. But dear, you can't stay here indefinitely. These two have their lives ahead of them. Privacy plans, a family soon. It's not fair to burden them with logistics." Her words were wrapped in velvet, but cut like glass. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, it's not about fairness. We just don't have space anymore." I looked at my son, the same boy who used to bring me crayon drawings of houses and stick figures labeled me and Mom. Now he couldn't even meet my eyes. "I'm not a burden," I said quietly. "I helped with the bills. I cook clean." Patricia raised a manicured hand. "No one's blaming you, dear, but it's time to think realistically. I know a senior home that's hiring kitchen helpers. Good people there. You'd fit right in." Melanie nodded approvingly. "That's actually a great idea, Mom. It'd give her something to do. Something to do. Like I needed a hobby to justify existing." I set the towel down on the counter, my voice steady. "I'm not working in a senior home, not after 25 years of service in one. I know what those kitchens are like." Patricia gave a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then perhaps you should find an apartment. There are programs for early retirees. Programs," I repeated, tasting the word. Ryan finally spoke, his tone clipped. "Mom, please. Let's not make this difficult. Melanie and I have discussed it. You can stay for another week or two, but after that we need to move forward." "Forward," I said softly. "Meaning away from me." The clock ticked above the mantel. The smell of brewed coffee had turned bitter. I looked at him. Really looked. His jawline had hardened with adulthood, but behind it I could still see traces of the boy who once refused to sleep without my hand on his back. That memory flickered and died. Ryan. I said I gave you everything I had. I sold my home to help you start yours. I thought family meant sharing the roof, not counting the square footage. He winced but didn't step closer. Patricia rose first, brushing invisible lint from her coat. "Emotions aside, this is for the best. Independence keeps everyone sane." And then, with a glance toward Ryan, she added quietly, "Do what's right, son." It happened so fast I didn't register the motion until I heard the sound, thud. Ryan had grabbed my old suitcase from the hallway closet and dropped it by the door. "Don't," I whispered. "Don't you dare." His voice cracked like dry wood. "You're not my responsibility, Mom. Not anymore." For a moment, all sound disappeared. I couldn't hear the clock or the wind or even my own breathing, just those words echoing inside the hollow of my chest. I walked toward the door slowly, the weight of the air pressing on every step. Inside that suitcase were just clothes, some sweaters, my reading glasses, a few family photos. I added 2 things: my small leather notebook filled with handwritten budgets and memories, and the old pocket watch my father gave me before he died. The only thing that had ever truly belonged to me. When I closed the latch, it clicked louder than thunder. Patricia murmured something about hoping I'd understand, but I didn't answer. I simply lifted the handle and opened the front door. Cold air rushed in, biting through my sleeves. The snow was still falling fine and relentless. As I stepped outside, I turned once more. Ryan stood by the staircase staring at the floor. Melanie leaned against the wall, arms crossed her face, unreadable. Patricia was already putting on her gloves. I wanted to say something, anything to break that frozen tableau, but what words could repair a love reduced to math, so I said nothing. The door shut behind me with a dull, final sound. I stood on the porch as the snow gathered on my coat, the wind stinging my eyes. The street was silent, the kind of silence that feels like punishment. I could see my reflection faintly in the window, small, pale, a figure dissolving into the white. Inside, the warm light of their living room glowed through the curtains. For a fleeting second, I saw their silhouettes move, Ryan pacing Melanie, setting the table again, Patricia adjusting her coat. Life continuing. My hands trembled around the handle of the suitcase. The pocket watch ticked faintly inside my pocket, steady and defiant. I wiped the snow from my lashes, but the tears blurred everything anyway. That night, I had lost more than a home. I had lost my place in my own family's story, and as the cold bit deeper into my skin, I realized this was no longer about survival. It was about dignity. The motel smelled faintly of bleach and rain. A flickering neon sign outside buzzed through the night. Evergreen Inn, weekly rates. The name sounded kinder than the place looked. I checked in with a trembling hand and a single suitcase. The receptionist barely looked up, sliding me a key attached to a cracked plastic tag. Room 12, $59 a night, no breakfast. The hallway was narrow, the carpet worn thin in the middle. I could hear the distant hum of a vending machine and the steady drip of a leaky faucet somewhere down the corridor. When I opened the door, a stale draft greeted me. The room was small, one bed, one table, one chair. Everything smelled of old smoke and detergent. Still, it was a roof, and for now, that was enough. I set the suitcase down on the bed and sat beside it. The springs creaked under my weight. For the first time in years, I had no one waiting for me, no plan, no sound except the soft hum of the heater, trying its best to stay alive. I thought about Ryan, about Melanie's folded arms, Patricia's perfume lingering in the air. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe. Crying felt useless now. Numbers and facts, those were solid things. If I treated my life like a ledger, I was still in the black. I had maybe $820 left in my account, my father's watch, and a will to keep standing. I unzipped the suitcase, trying to bring some order to the chaos. Clothes neatly folded, the notebook, a few old bills. And then something I didn't remember packing, a large brown envelope sealed with wax. My heart stuttered. The name on it was written in cursive, faint, but unmistakable Eleanor Grant. For a moment, I just stared. Eleanor had been my boss for 15 years, the founder of the nursing home chain where I'd worked. She was brilliant, intimidating, and fiercely fair. A woman who never wasted a word but never missed an act of kindness either. 3 years ago, she had retired to Arizona after a stroke. We'd exchanged a few holiday cards after that, and then silence. I broke the wax seal carefully. Inside were two things, a handwritten letter and a thick set of papers folded beneath it. The letter began in her tidy, deliberate script. Dear Linda, if you are reading this, it means I am gone. I won't try to soften that. You know I've never liked long goodbyes. You were more than an employee to me. You kept the books clean, the staff paid, and my conscience clear. When others chased expansion, you insisted on dignity for the residents and for the people who cared for them. You built this place with me, and I never forgot it. Enclosed is a sealed agreement that transfers my remaining company shares to you $6 million worth at last valuation. It's not charity. It's acknowledgement. Use it as you see fit. Build something honest, something that reminds people that compassion still belongs in business. You built this place with me, Linda. This is your legacy. Eleanor Grant. I froze the letter, trembling slightly in my hands. The words didn't register at first. $6 million sounded like fiction, a number that belonged to another life. I read the letter again, slower this time, tracing each word with my finger, as if touching her voice. A quiet pressure filled my chest, somewhere between disbelief and grief. I hadn't even known she'd passed away. I hadn't been there to say goodbye. My eyes dropped to the contract beneath the letter, a notarized document dated 6 months earlier. Eleanor's signature, bold and deliberate, stood beside a corporate seal. The legal language was clear upon her death. Her personal shares in Grant Senior Living Holdings would transfer to Linda Carpenter, effective immediately. I pressed the papers to my chest. The room spun a little, not from excitement, but from the weight of it. All my life, I'd prided myself on surviving without help, without owing anyone. Yet here I was, penniless one night, and suddenly entrusted with more than I'd ever imagined. I tried to picture Eleanor, her silver hair pulled back, her half smile when she reviewed my reports, the way she'd once said, "Integrity doesn't shout Linda. It whispers, but everyone hears it." Tears blurred my vision. Outside, the snow had stopped leaving behind a soft, glowing stillness. I opened the window slightly. The cold air felt clean against my skin. I sat at the small table, unfolded the letter again, and read it aloud, my voice trembling. You built this place with me. This is your legacy. Legacy. The word echoed in the empty room like a bell. I thought about how just 24 hours earlier my son had thrown my suitcase out the door, how Patricia's polished voice had told me to find independence, How I had stood in the snow, humiliated and invisible. Now in a motel room that smelled of bleach, I had become a millionaire and no one knew. The irony stung, but beneath it, something deeper began to stir. Not anger, not revenge, just a quiet, solemn resolve. I lit the small candle I kept in my bag, one I used to burn on Eleanor's birthday at the office. Its faint flame flickered against the window pane. I poured hot water over a tea bag I'd carried with me from home, the steam curling upward like a blessing. The reflection of the candlelight danced across the papers, the letter, the signature, the weight of trust. I whispered, my voice steady now. "Thank you, Eleanor. I'll use this the right way." The wind sighed against the glass. The candle burned lower, casting long, calm shadows across the room. For the first time since leaving that house, I didn't feel like a discarded old woman. I felt like someone reborn from silence, armed not with bitterness, but with purpose. Eleanor had given me more than money. She had given me a mirror showing me the woman I once was and could be again. And as the clock ticked quietly on the motel wall, I realized that wealth was not the twist of fate. It was the test that followed. By the next morning, the snow outside had hardened into a thin crust of glass. The world looked fragile, glittering and utterly still, like it might shatter if I breathed too hard. I hadn't slept much. The letter from Eleanor still lay on the nightstand beside my bed, folded carefully under the candle stub. $6 million. The number echoed in my mind, detached from reality, but the accountant in me, the woman who once stayed up 3 nights reconciling payroll errors down to the cent needed proof. I made a decision as the first light touched the curtains. It was time to verify the truth. The First Denver Bank stood on the corner of Maple and Fifth, an old stone building with brass handles polished by a century of nervous hands. I walked in quietly, clutching my worn purse and the folder Eleanor had sent. My clothes were simple black coat knit scarf, the same shoes I'd worn the day Ryan threw me out. The lobby smelled of coffee and disinfectant. Behind the counter, a young woman in a navy blazer looked up, smiled professionally, and said, "Good morning. How can I help you?" "My name is Linda Carpenter," I said, steadying my voice. "I'd like to confirm a transfer listed under my name, an estate trust, from Eleanor Grant." Her fingers hesitated on the keyboard. "Of course." "May I see your ID and any accompanying documents?" I handed over the folder. The letter, the notarized contract. The woman's expression shifted subtly from routine courtesy to focused attention. She excused herself and disappeared behind a glass partition. Minutes passed. The kind of minutes that stretch long enough for your heartbeat to find its own rhythm. I sat down on the edge of a leather chair staring at the marble floor, the same floor I'd once polished with careful shoes when escorting residents' families through financial briefings. Back then, I'd been the one double-checking others' ledgers. Today, I was the ledger. Finally, the woman returned with a manager in a dark suit trailing behind. "Mrs. Carpenter," he said, his voice measured. "We verified the documents. Ms. Grant's estate trust was activated 3 weeks ago. You are listed as the sole beneficiary." I swallowed hard. "And the balance?" He adjusted his tie. "As of this morning, the account holds $6,072,411.16. The words seemed to come from underwater. For a long moment, I could only hear the hum of fluorescent lights. Then, like a tide rising from somewhere deep, came relief and a strange kind of sorrow. Eleanor's handwriting flashed before my eyes. "This is your legacy." The manager cleared his throat. "Would you like to meet with one of our financial advisors, ma'am? We can help structure the funds, perhaps discuss investment." I cut him off, gently smiling. "No, thank you. I've been balancing books my whole life." He hesitated, then nodded respectfully. I signed the confirmation forms, requested secure access to the trust account, and left. The winter air hit my face like a baptism-cold, bracing reel. For the first time in months, I walked with purpose. Not as someone seeking shelter, but as someone quietly reclaiming control. By afternoon, I found myself standing inside a real estate showroom off Cherry Creek. It wasn't planned. I'd passed the large glass windows on my way to the bus stop, drawn by the sight of sunlight spilling across polished floors. The sign above the door read, Lydia Hartwell Realty. Inside, warmth wrapped around me like silk. The scent of fresh lilies and lemon cleaner filled the air. A young woman behind the reception desk looked up with a bright smile. "Hi there, I'm Lydia, looking for a home." Her tone wasn't patronizing, just genuinely kind. Maybe that's why I walked further in. "Yes," I said. "Something small, quiet, maybe near the foothills." She motioned for me to sit. "Of course. We have several listings. Are you thinking of renting or buying?" I answered simply. Before Lydia could respond, another voice entered the room, sharper, older. "Well, we'll see about that." A tall man in a fitted gray suit emerged from an office. His name tag read, Mr. Calloway, Managing Broker. He gave Lydia a quick glance, then looked me over my plain coat, scuffed shoes, the faint smell of motel soap. "Lydia," he said, lowering his voice, "but not enough. We don't need to waste too much time on window shoppers." My stomach tightened. I stayed silent. But Lydia flushed. "She's not wasting anyone's time, Mr. Calloway. We're here to help." He smirked. Of course. It's just these properties start at 7 figures. You understand, ma'am, they require proof of funds before we can proceed." He turned to me directly now, tone syrupy with doubt. "Do you have that kind of capability?" I reached into my purse, pulled out my phone, and opened the banking app. My finger hovered for a second before I tilted the screen toward him. Balance 672-411-16. For a full 3 seconds, the room was silent. Lydia's lips parted slightly. Mr. Calloway blinked twice, color draining from his face. The only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling lights. I could almost hear the click of his recalculating mind, the same sound I'd heard all my life when people tried to assign me a value. I met his eyes, calm and clear. "Now," I said softly, "why don't you show me something with good sunlight?" 15 minutes later, Lydia was driving me toward the edge of town. The car heater hummed gently. She kept stealing glances at me, curiosity mingled with quiet respect. At the crest of a hill, we stopped before a house of pale brick and glass. Wide windows framed the mountains beyond. The place wasn't extravagant, just open breathing, full of light. When I stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and new beginnings. I could already imagine the kettle on the counter, the soft tick of my father's watch beside a vase of lilies. Lydia smiled. "It's peaceful, isn't it?" I nodded. "Peaceful is good." The afternoon sun poured through the tall windows, reflecting off the polished wood floor like a mirror. And for the first time in a long while, I saw my reflection not as someone lost, but as someone quietly building again, someone ready to turn legacy into life. The ink dried slowly under my hand. 2 signatures, 2 deeds, 2 new beginnings. By the end of that week, I owned 2 adjoining houses on Elm Ridge, one to live in and one to rent out. The realtor Lydia couldn't stop smiling as she handed me the keys. I told her simply, "Keep it quiet." She nodded, her eyes wide as if she had just witnessed a small miracle. Everything moved quickly after that. A notary arrived, papers were signed, and the transfer was complete. No loans, no waiting, cash. When the final stamp hit the page, the sound echoed in the quiet office like a heartbeat. Outside, the snow had melted into pale slush. The afternoon sun reflected off the car windows, soft and forgiving. I walked down the steps with both keychains in my hand, 2 pieces of metal cool and solid, heavier than gold. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine in the empty living room. No furniture yet, just light filtering through the tall windows and the faint sound of wind. I set the glass down, watched the red swirl catch the evening glow, and smiled. Not the smile of triumph, just the quiet satisfaction of someone who had reclaimed the narrative. If my life had been a movie, this would be the montage sequence pen scratching over contracts, a banker's handshake, a flicker of my reflection in the window as I unlocked the front door, the pour of wine, the soft chords of piano playing from somewhere only I could hear. No words needed. A week later, the world found out anyway. It started with a neighbor, a chatty woman named Mrs. Lang, who posted photos of her new lovely neighbor on a community Facebook group. She tagged the realty agency, and there it was. Congratulations to our newest homeowner, Ms. Linda Carpenter. 2 homes purchased side by side in Cherry Creek, paid in full. By morning, it had spread across local realtor pages. I didn't even have social media, but life has a way of bringing news to those who least deserve it. The phone call came on a Tuesday afternoon. My old number, the one Ryan still had, lit up the screen. For a long moment, I just stared at it. When I finally answered, his voice trembled somewhere between disbelief and guilt. "Mom, is it true?" "You bought a house," I said nothing. "I don't understand. Where did you even get the money? Did someone help you?" I could almost hear Melanie in the background whispering. Then faintly, Patricia's sharper tone. She must have stolen it. I closed my eyes. In that moment, I realized how little they truly knew me. To them, money only came through dependence or deceit. The idea that it could come through decades of integrity and one woman's quiet endurance was too foreign to comprehend. Ryan spoke again, softer now. "Mom, can we meet? Please. I want to talk." I looked out through the window. The late light glinted off the 2 roofs visible from my porch mine and the one next door that I'd just leased to a young single mother and her daughter. They were planting flowers together that afternoon, laughing in the cold air. Mom Ryan's voice broke through the line again. I pressed the red button. The call ended. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was earned. Over the next few days, I kept busy. The first house became my home, a sanctuary of stillness. Cream walls, pine shelves, linen curtains. I bought every piece myself, choosing carefully a table for writing, a chair for reading, and a kettle that whistled softly at 7 a.m., like a ritual of peace. The second house I restored, gently repaired the porch, planted rosemary along the fence, replaced the cracked tiles in the kitchen. I wanted it to feel like safety for whoever would live there next. When Lydia stopped by to drop off the final paperwork, she lingered a while. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Why 2 houses?" I smiled. One to remember what I lost, one to remind me what I found. She nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing enough not to ask more. A few evenings later, I sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, the steam curling upward into the cool air. Across the street, the neighborhood children were sledding down the last patches of snow. The sound of their laughter drifted toward me, distant, pure, unburdened. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't counting minutes or bills or mistakes, just breaths, just life. The phone buzzed again. Ryan this time with a message. "Mom, I'm sorry for how things went. We didn't mean to hurt you. Can we start over?" I stared at the words until they blurred. There was a time when that message would have made me cry, but now it only made me still. Some debts can be repaid, others simply expire. I put the phone down, opened my notebook, the same leather-bound one I'd carried since the day I left his house, and flipped to a clean page. The candlelight trembled slightly as I wrote, "I don't owe anyone my peace anymore." Then I closed it slowly, carefully. Outside, the wind rose again, rustling the cedar trees by the fence. But inside, everything was steady. The quiet had returned, not as punishment, but as reward. And though I had no intention of flaunting what I now owned, I knew the truth would reach them eventually. People always talk. They'd call it luck or fate or irony. But it wasn't any of those things. It was balance. Life finally reconciling its books. The morning had started quietly, the kind of calm that follows a long storm. I'd spent the past week choosing curtains and colors, little things that make a house breathe. My new home finally felt alive, soft, warm, filled with the smell of cedar and jasmine tea. That day, Lydia suggested I visit a furniture showroom downtown to finalize the living room set. I almost said no. Crowds had never been my comfort zone. but something in me wanted to step out to be seen, not for what I had, but for who I had become. The store was the kind of place where silence costs money, polished marble floors, gentle jazz, rows of cream-colored sofas arranged under golden lights. Everything gleamed, including the salespeople's smiles. I wandered between displays, my fingers tracing the edge of a walnut table. It was elegant, solid, the kind of craftsmanship that spoke without boasting. I could already imagine it in my living room beneath the portrait of my late mentor, Eleanor Grant. Then from across the room, I heard a voice I hadn't expected to hear again. Well, if it isn't Linda. My hand froze on the table. I turned. There they were, Patricia and Melanie. Patricia in her usual tailored coat pearls glinting like tiny judgments. Melanie beside her phone in hand, face painted with the confidence of someone who believed the world was her stage. Melanie's smirk came first. Wow, didn't expect to see you here. Furniture shopping. How ambitious. Patricia's tone dripped sugar and venom in equal parts. Oh, darling, maybe she's looking for discount sets. You know how the compensation packages work when old employees retire. The sales associate standing beside them shifted uncomfortably. I saw his eyes flick between us, between their smug postures and my simple black sweater. I said nothing, just smiled faintly. Melanie chuckled. What are you even doing here, Linda? You can't possibly afford this place. My husband and I looked at that sofa last month. It's $90 grand. More than your car, I'm sure. Patricia added. Oh, Melanie, don't be cruel. Maybe she just came to look. There's no harm in pretending. Their laughter rippled through the air, low, practiced, performative. Something inside me stayed perfectly still. I walked past them, tracing the edge of the sofa they'd been mocking. The leather was buttery soft, the stitching perfect. I lowered myself into it, slow and deliberate, testing the seat like I'd done this 100 times before. The salesman, still unsure which way the wind was blowing, approached hesitantly. Would you like to, see the catalog, ma'am? I looked up at him. No need. I'll take this set. The sofa, the armchairs, the coffee table, everything in this display. Patricia's laughter stopped mid-breath. Melanie blinked. I'm sorry. What I reached into my bag, took out my checkbook, the one tied to my trust account, and wrote a number slowly, clearly, in neat accountant's handwriting. $90,000. Geckos. The salesman's breath caught. He looked at the amount, then at me, then at them. Would you like this delivered to your address on Elm Ridge, Mrs. Carpenter? Yes, I said, signing my name. Use the main entrance. The pen left a soft, final stroke. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. Even the background music seemed to pause. I stood up, smoothed my coat, and looked at Patricia and Melanie. Patricia's face had turned crimson, her mouth opened, then closed, searching for words that wouldn't come. She fumbled with her purse and muttered, "This is absurd," before storming toward the exit, her heels clicking too fast, too loud. Melanie stayed frozen in disbelief. Then reflexively she lifted her phone and began recording, forcing a brittle laugh. "Guys," she said into the camera, her voice artificially bright. "Look, who's out here pretending to be a millionaire? My husband's mom's ex-boss or something. This is hilarious." Her live stream lasted all of 30 seconds. Because as she panned her phone across the room, the salesman quietly said, "Ma'am, I'd prefer you not film our VIP client." Someone nearby whispered, "She's not pretending. She's the one who bought both Elm Ridge houses last month." A ripple moved through the showroom, soft gasps, whispers spreading like wildfire. The chat on her live stream began flooding with comments. "Wait, that's Linda Carpenter. She's the investor who paid cash. The younger woman's lying. I saw the paperwork on our office feed. OMG, she's embarrassing herself. Turn off the camera." Melanie's smile froze. Her screen filled with angry emojis and mocking laughter. The color drained from her face. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to stop recording," the salesman repeated, firmer this time. She stammered something about a misunderstanding, then shoved her phone into her bag and turned away. I didn't move. I simply stood by the sofa, calm as the room shifted around me. Every pair of eyes was on us now. Every whisper carried the weight of reversal. I looked at Melanie, not with anger, but with the quiet recognition of someone who had already moved past hate. Some debts, I said softly, don't need collection exposure is enough. And then I turned to the salesman. Please make sure it's delivered by Friday. He nodded almost reverently. As I walked toward the exit, I caught a glimpse of our reflections in the mirrored wall, two women once bound by the same family, now separated by a single truth. Dignity doesn't shout. It reveals. Outside, the winter air was sharp, but it no longer bit. I pulled my scarf tighter and smiled to myself, not from victory, but from release. Because revenge, I realized, doesn't always need a stage. Sometimes it's as quiet as signing your own name and watching silence do the rest. The storm didn't come with thunder. It came with a notification. The morning after the showroom incident, I woke to the faint vibration of my phone on the nightstand. The screen glowed with dozens of missed messages, most from numbers I didn't recognize. A few from Lydia. One from my old coworker, Ellen. Linda, don't read the comments. Just don't. I didn't understand until I opened my email. My mother abandoned me. The truth about Linda Carpenter. The thumbnail was my son's face. Ryan. He had gone live. The video started with soft music and perfect lighting. The kind of production you can only achieve when you plan pain like a campaign. He sat in what looked like their living room, Melanie's favorite beige couch. Behind him framed photos lined up neatly. He spoke with a calm, rehearsed sorrow. I didn't want to do this. He began, his voice heavy with performative grief. But the internet needs to know that not every parent deserves the pedestal we put them on. I could feel the script before he said it. My mother, Linda Carpenter, abandoned me. After my father died, I supported her for years. I gave her a home, paid her bills. But when things got hard, she left. And now she's out there pretending she's some kind of success story using money she didn't earn, probably from manipulating my late father's estate. I froze. Every word was surgical. Every lie perfectly timed. Behind him, Melanie nodded solemnly, her hand on his shoulder like a co-star. She humiliated us publicly. Ryan continued through her wealth in our faces. People think she's some saint. She's not. She's a master manipulator. A parasite in reverse, feeding on guilt instead of money. The word hit harder than I expected. Parasite in reverse. I closed my eyes. By noon, the video had 500,000 views. The comments were chaos divided, vicious, alive with judgment. He sounds so genuine. That poor son, his mom, must have been awful. She probably scammed some old boss. Parasite in reverse. Perfect phrase. Others defended me. Wait, isn't she the investor who bought those homes in cash? This story doesn't add up. Maybe he's mad because she finally stood up for herself. But the internet doesn't want balance. It wants blood. And in that moment, I became its newest target. Lydia called that evening, her voice tense. Linda, you're trending on TikTok. People are stitching his clip, arguing about whether you're a fraud or a genius. Some reporter even emailed the realty office asking for a statement. I thanked her, told her to ignore it, and hung up. The quiet after was almost deafening. I sat by the window watching the winter light fade. The tea beside me had gone cold. For the first time since moving into this house, it didn't feel like a sanctuary. The same walls that had once felt protective now seemed to echo. I reached for my notebook, the same one that had carried me through everything. The pages smelled faintly of cedar and ink. I flipped to a new sheet and wrote slowly, "Let him finish his performance. Then I'll show the receipts." My handwriting didn't shake, because this wasn't anger, it was clarity. In the following days, the digital storm grew teeth. Influencers dissected my past. Bloggers recycled my name for clicks. Headlines appeared on small tabloids. Retired accountant accused of elder guilt scheme. The 6 million mystery of Linda Carpenter. The irony almost made me laugh. They spoke about me as if I were a ghost, haunting the algorithm, half villain, half myth. Ryan kept posting too, each video more dramatic than the last. One clip showed him pretending to cry, saying, "She doesn't even call me her son anymore." In the comments, Melanie replied with heart emojis. It was theater, and I was the unwilling script. But I didn't reply. Not once. I went about my days quietly. Morning walks, tea, small repairs around the house. The internet screamed and I listened to cello. Eleanor once told me, "When the noise gets loud, lower the volume inside yourself." So that's what I did. At night, I'd light a single candle and let the sound of a cello fill the room, slow, deliberate, heavy with patience. The notes didn't fight the storm. They waited for it to pass. That's what truth does. By the fourth day, journalists were circling. A car had parked outside the house twice. I caught a glimpse of a long lens behind the windshield. Lydia texted, "Do you want me to handle a statement?" I replied, "No." Silence is a language too, because the world had forgotten something I'd learned long ago from Eleanor's ledgers, that evidence doesn't shout. It simply exists. And I had it. Every receipt, every document, every email between me and the Grant Foundation, dated, signed, verified. When the time came, I would not argue. I would show. But not yet. Not when anger was still currency. That night, the snow returned, thick, soft, soundless. I stood by the window with my notebook open again, tracing the words I'd written earlier. My reflection merged with the falling white outside. Ryan's latest video was still trending. Someone had clipped a moment where he said, "She taught me numbers but forgot to teach me love." The internet ate it up. I let it play once without sound. Then I closed the screen. There was a time I would have defended myself, explained, justified. Now I understood that truth doesn't need an audience. It just needs endurance. The cello's low notes filled the room again, slow, steady, patient. Each vibration felt like breath under ice, waiting for spring. Let him perform. Let them watch. When the curtain finally falls, I'll bring the ledger. And this time, the world will see which side of the balance truly held the weight. The night I decided to speak, there was no anger left, only stillness. For days, I had watched the storm feed on itself, every headline louder than the last. I had been called everything from manipulator to parasite in reverse. They built a character out of my silence, and like every myth, it had begun to replace the woman herself. So I lit a single candle, placed my notebook beside the laptop, and opened the camera. The red light blinked on. No filters, no music, no script. Just me sitting at my own kitchen table, the same one I'd balanced bills and dinner plates on for decades. I looked directly into the lens and said quietly, "So this is the mother he says abandoned him." The chat filled instantly, lines of text flooding upward faster than I could read. Some were curious, others cruel. I didn't respond. Instead, I lifted the first file from the stack beside me, a folded envelope yellowed with age. "This," I said, holding it steady, "is the hospital bill from 1991, the year Ryan was admitted for pneumonia. It cost $2,700. I paid it in full. You can see my signature at the bottom." I set it down and reached for another document. "This is the tuition statement from Denver Elementary, 15 years of education, every check signed by me. No father listed, just a mother doing her best." The chat slowed. The scrolling text turned from insults to silence. I reached for a photo next to a small, faded picture of a boy in a winter jacket, smiling with missing teeth. "And this," I said, voice steady, "is the child I took home from a foster agency when he was 2 years old." I paused. The weight of that truth settled in the air like snow. The room went so quiet I could hear the soft hum of my refrigerator in the background. "He wasn't abandoned by me," I continued. "He was abandoned to me, left on a courthouse bench with a tag that said Ryan. No last name, no history." The comments exploded, disbelief, confusion, sorrow all at once. "Wait, she adopted him. This changes everything." He never mentioned that. I nodded slowly, almost to myself. I was 35 then, a junior accountant working 3 jobs, nursing home auditor by day, grocery clerk by night, bookkeeping for a small garage on weekends. I didn't have much, but I had enough to feed him, enough to love him, enough to give him a name and a life. I picked up another document, this one crisp official. Here's the adoption decree, signed and sealed by Judge H. Benson, dated March 3, 1993. It says, "The child hereby takes the surname Carpenter." I looked up again. He became my son that day, and I have never once regretted it. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it break my tone. I worked through fevers through nights so long I used to sleep in the office break room. I packed him lunches, paid his college tuition, even bought his first house when he said he wanted a family. Every cent recorded, every promise kept. I held up the folder, neat, thick, labeled Ryan's life expenses. "Because that's what accountants do," I said softly. "We keep records." For a long moment, I didn't speak. I let the papers rustle quietly on the table. The chat had changed completely. She has proof. She raised him alone. He lied. I'm crying. Why would he say those things about her? Someone wrote, "She doesn't sound angry. She sounds heartbroken." That was the only comment I read twice. I reached for the last envelope, a white one, newer than the rest. It contained a copy of the wire transfer receipt from the Grant Estate Trust, stamped by the bank. "This," I said, "is how I bought my home. A legitimate inheritance from my employer, Eleanor Grant. You can call the bank, you can call the lawyer, you can call the estate office. Everything is verifiable." I placed it carefully on top of the pile. Then I looked into the camera again. "I didn't come here to humiliate my son," I said quietly. "I came here to remind him, and maybe the world, that numbers don't lie. Receipts don't lie. The internet might, but ink and time never do." I leaned back slightly, exhaling for the first time in what felt like days. "Ryan," I said, and this time I let the mother in my voice surface. "You wanted to tell the world your version. You've had your turn." "This," I gestured to the mountain of papers, "is mine." A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it, not from sadness, but from release. The cello music began softly in the background, a recording of Yo-Yo Ma playing The Swan. I hadn't planned it, but it started automatically from a saved playlist. The deep notes filled the room like a quiet reckoning. The chat flooded again. Hearts broken, emojis, apologies. She's the definition of grace. I misjudged her. Ryan should be ashamed. This woman deserves peace. I smiled faintly and reached for my notebook. I flipped to the page I'd written the night before. Beneath the old line, "Let him finish his performance. Then I'll show the receipts." I added one more. Then I read it aloud for everyone listening. My voice calm, unwavering. I didn't cut him off. I just stopped financing disrespect. The comment feed froze for a heartbeat, then exploded again, some crying emojis, others writing "Legend Respect, Mother of the Year." I closed the notebook gently, folded my hands, and looked into the lens one last time. "This," I said softly, "is all I have to say." Then I ended the stream. The candle beside me flickered as the screen went black. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the street glistening under pale light. I sat there for a while, listening to the cello fade its final notes, heavy with both pain and peace. For the first time since the storm began, the silence that followed didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Justice doesn't shout. It simply arrives quietly, precisely, and right on schedule. 3 months after my live stream, the case was called to court. Carpenter vs. Carpenter. Defamation, harassment, public injury. The irony of that title wasn't lost on me. A mother and her son facing each other across polished oak benches beneath a seal that read, "In God we trust," words that felt heavier than ever. The courtroom smelled of paper dust and restraint. I sat at the plaintiff's table with my attorney, Miss Nguyen, a sharp woman in her 40s who spoke like every sentence was a closing argument. Across from us, Ryan sat beside his lawyer, shoulders hunched, jaw tight. Melanie wasn't there. When he glanced my way, I could almost see the boy I once held in my arms, the one who'd cried over scraped knees, who'd whispered, "Thank you, Mom," every Christmas morning. But that boy was gone now, replaced by a man blinded by shame and pride. The clerk called the case. The judge, a silver-haired woman named Honor Martha Keene, adjusted her glasses and looked over the file. Her tone was calm, factual. "Ms. Carpenter," she began, "you filed suit for defamation and online harassment, claiming significant reputational and emotional damage caused by a series of public broadcasts. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice even. "And Mr. Carpenter," she turned to Ryan, "you've maintained your statements were expressions of opinion, not malicious falsehoods. Is that still your position?" Ryan nodded mutely. His lawyer spoke for him. My client was under emotional distress. He regrets his words. Regret, I thought, was always cheaper after consequences. "Miss..." Nguyen began our argument. She didn't raise her voice once. "Your Honor," she said, clicking the projector remote, "these are the receipts, literal and figurative." On the courtroom screen appeared the same documents I'd shown the world: adoption records, tuition invoices, hospital bills, tax forms, and finally the notarized will from Eleanor Grant. "This is not a woman exploiting anyone," Ms. Nguyen continued. "This is a woman who worked 3 jobs, raised a child not of her blood, and still found grace to forgive until defamation forced her to defend herself. Mr. Carpenter's broadcasts were viewed over 9 million times. He monetized them. He called his mother a fraud, a thief, a parasite. Those are not opinions. Those are lies." Her voice was steady, sharp as glass. Ryan shifted uncomfortably. His lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised her hand. Overruled. When Ms. Nguyen sat down, I felt a hand squeeze my shoulder. It was Lydia sitting quietly behind me there for moral support. She smiled faintly, eyes glistening. Then it was Ryan's turn. His lawyer stood, tried to paint the live streams as emotional expression. He claimed my video had provoked public response. He spoke for 12 minutes straight, carefully avoiding the one word that mattered: truth. When he finished, the judge turned to Ryan. "Mr. Carpenter," she said, "do you have anything to say before I make my ruling?" Ryan hesitated. For a brief second, he looked like he might cry. His lips trembled, eyes darting toward me. "Mom," he whispered, barely audible. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't respond, because the truth was, it already had. The judge sighed, removed her glasses, and folded her hands. "Mr. Carpenter," she said, "you publicly defamed your mother, weaponized her kindness, and monetized her reputation for sympathy. Your conduct shows malice, not distress. The court orders you to issue a public retraction, pay compensatory damages of $450, and you are hereby prohibited from producing or posting any online content related to Ms. Carpenter or her estate." She turned to the clerk. "Motion for injunction granted. Case closed." The sound of the gavel echoed through the room, 3 short knocks that felt like the punctuation at the end of a long, painful sentence. Ryan's head fell forward into his hands. His lawyer leaned close, whispering damage control. But justice, I realized, doesn't negotiate. It simply lands. In the days that followed, news outlets summarized it all with polite brevity. Court rules in favor of retired accountant in defamation case. No gossip, no spectacle, just facts. And when the internet saw the verdict, the tide turned completely. People who had once mocked me began sending apologies. Strangers called it a victory for dignity. Ryan deactivated his channels. Melanie, ever the opportunist, filed for divorce 2 weeks later. The last I heard, Patricia left town quietly. Some debts collect themselves. One afternoon in early spring, I received an envelope from the county clerk. Inside was a single-page transfer of property. The same house Ryan had once forced me to sign away. The judge's note attached was short, restored to rightful ownership. When I returned there for the first time, the house looked smaller than I remembered. The shutters hung crooked, the porch, paint was chipped. But as I stepped inside, the air still carried faint traces of lavender and memory. Dust coated the windowsills. I ran my hand across them, leaving streaks of light. The sunlight poured through, touching my palms, hands that had once trembled from exhaustion, now trembling for another reason entirely: closure. I sat down by the window and exhaled slowly. Outside, the trees were budding again, small green shoots pushing through the cold. Renewal had a sound, quiet, persistent, alive. A week later, I attended the final court hearing to close the injunction. When the judge read the line, "Case closed," a hush fell over the room. It was over. No applause, no cheers. Just the soft sound of pages being filed and the faint echo of the courtroom piano. The court clerk had left a playlist running accidentally, a gentle classical tune that filled the air like forgiveness itself. I smiled faintly. Justice, I thought, doesn't need to shout. It just needs to be written down, signed, and sealed. As I walked out into the afternoon sun, I whispered the words to myself, "Case closed," and for the first time in years, I felt the weight leave my shoulders. 6 months have passed since the courtroom closed its doors. Spring arrived slowly that year like a gentle apology from the universe. The lake outside my new home thawed one layer at a time until the water shimmered clean and quiet again. Mornings here are a symphony of small sounds, wind brushing through cattails ducks, landing on still water, and the soft scrape of my garden trowel against soil. I live simply now in a house by the lake that smells of rosemary and wet earth. My days begin with tea and end with writing. The silence isn't empty anymore. It's filled with rhythm, with breath, with forgiveness. Every week, women from nearby towns come to my porch carrying notebooks and old calculators. Widows, retirees, mothers who never got to finish school. I teach them accounting for free, just the basics, balancing budgets, reading statements, understanding value. They laugh at first saying, "Numbers are too cold." But by the end of the lesson, they realize what I've always known, that numbers are just stories told in order. I see myself in them the way their hands tremble when they first hold a pen, the way they straighten their backs when the math finally makes sense. They remind me that beginnings don't belong to the young. They belong to the willing. One afternoon, while I was pruning the lavender beds, a car stopped near the fence. A young journalist stepped out, a woman in her 20s, camera, slung over her shoulder, hair tied in a messy bun. "Mrs. Carpenter," she called softly. I wiped my hands on my apron and nodded. "Yes, I'm writing a feature for Modern Women today. It's about resilience and starting over after public trials." She hesitated. "Would you mind if I asked a few questions?" We sat on the porch while the sunlight danced across the lake. She turned on her recorder, but her expression stayed kind human. "Do you regret adopting him?" she asked finally. The question didn't sting. It just landed softly like a petal on water. I looked toward the lake where the afternoon light had turned everything gold. Then I smiled. "No," I said. "I only regret learning too late that love without boundaries becomes self-destruction." She didn't speak for a while. She just nodded, eyes glistening, and turned off the recorder. That night, after she left, I sat by the window with my journal open. The air was cool, the moon reflecting silver over the lake. I wrote the date at the top of the page and let my thoughts move freely. No calculations, no court filings, just words that belonged to me alone. Piece, I wrote, isn't the absence of conflict. It's the decision to stop rehearsing pain. Forgiveness, I added, isn't about others deserving it. It's about yourself deserving rest. When I closed the book, I realized I was no longer writing about survival. I was writing about life. Every Sunday, I walk the lake's edge at sunrise. There's a wooden bench near the willow trees where I sit with my tea. Sometimes I talk to Eleanor there as if she can still hear me through the still water. I tell her about the women learning spreadsheets on my porch, about Lydia's engagement to the kind banker she met during my case, about how the garden has started blooming early this year. And every time I say her name, the wind moves through the reeds like a whisper of approval. She once told me legacy isn't what you leave. It's what you teach someone to carry. Now I understand. The world has long since moved on from my story. Ryan lives quietly somewhere in Arizona. He sent a letter once, not to ask forgiveness, but to say he'd started therapy. I didn't reply, but I placed the envelope in my drawer. Some words don't need answers to be enough. Melanie remarried, I heard. Patricia vanished into Florida chasing another illusion of control. As for me, I've stopped watching from the sidelines of my own life. Each morning I open the windows wide and let clean light flood in, touching the same hands that once shook in fear. The same hands that signed paychecks, adoption papers, lawsuits, and freedom. Now they only hold soil and pen ink. Sometimes the women I teach ask me what money feels like after all that. I tell them the truth. It feels like quiet. They laugh, thinking it's a joke. But it's not. Because I've learned that wealth has nothing to do with digits. It's the ability to look in the mirror and see no debt, not in your account, not in your heart. I've learned that boundaries are not walls. They're windows cleaned of fog, letting light in clearly. And I've learned that even after betrayal, dignity can still bloom in the same soil where pain once lived. As evening falls, I sit on the porch again, the notebook on my lap, the lake glistening like polished glass. The air smells of mint and rain. From somewhere down the road, a piano melody drifts a child practicing scales, missing notes, but finding courage. I close my eyes and listen. It's imperfect. It's beautiful. Because healing like music doesn't need to be flawless to be real. The sun sinks lower, painting the water in gold and rose. I whisper a quiet line, not to anyone in particular, but to the world itself. Empires aren't built with money. They're built with self-respect. The words linger in the air, gentle but sure, the sound of clean light. And in that moment, I know this is not revenge. This is rebirth. If you're still here, thank you truly. Linda's story wasn't just about justice or loss. It was about rebirth in silence and the quiet power of self-respect. If this story touched you, please leave a like to support more stories like this one. Subscribe so you never miss the next journey, and tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? We read every single comment because here, every listener becomes part of the story. See you in the next episode. And as Linda once said, empires aren't built with money. They're built with self-respect.